Hello everyone, welcome to Entitiy Programming Solutions. So in last video we have created one Maven project and added the Hibernate dependencies, and also we have created this configuration file. Okay, so this is our hibernate.cfg.xml file. Now in today's video we will see how to create the entity, then how to create the table, and how to insert the data in the MySQL. Okay, so basically all the CRUD operations we are going to perform today. Also we will see how to create the session and session factory. Okay, so let's start with the video. Very first let's create the session and session factory, and after that we will create the entity. Okay, so now here we have one app.java file. Okay, so in this app.java file let's create the session first. Okay, so how to create the session? For that we have to use session interface. Okay, so this session is the interface. If we do command click, you can see that this session is an interface. Okay, so now if we go to our app.java file here, to create the object of this session, as this is the interface, we cannot create the object by writing new session. Okay, because this is the interface. So to create the session we need to create the session factory. Okay, so session factory which is coming from org.hibernate. Now if you go to this session factory, this session factory is also an interface. So again we cannot create the object of this session factory. Okay, so now to create this session factory we need to create the object of configuration class. So this configuration class is coming from org.hibernate.cfg. Okay, so we have to create the object of this configuration class. If you go to this configuration, you can see that this is the class, this is not the interface. Okay, so if we go to our app.java file, we can easily create the object of this configuration class using new keyword. So new configuration. Okay, so now we have created the object of this configuration class. Now by using this configuration we can create the session factory. So how we can write here? Here we have to write configuration dot build session factory. Okay, so this method will give us a session factory. Okay, so here we will write build session factory. Now once we got the session factory, then we can get the session. Okay, so for that let's write session factory dot open session. Okay, so this way we can create the session. So to create the session we need the session factory, and to create the session factory we need the configuration, and this configuration is a class, and session factory and session are the interfaces. Okay, now here when we are writing this configuration class, okay, so here we have to write configuration dot configure, and in this configure method we have to provide our configuration file name. Okay, so now what is the name of our configuration file? hibernate.cfg.xml. So we have to provide that here, hibernate.cfg.xml. Okay, so this configuration file name we can provide in this configure method. Now our task here to create the session and session factory is done. Now let's create the entity. Okay, so let's save this and let me close other files. Okay, now in this com.sjprogramming.hibernate example package, let's create one more entity. So new class, and here I will give the name as a employee. Okay, so now we will create the employee entity. So very first, whenever we create the entity, we have to annotate that class with the entity annotation. okay, and this entity annotation is coming from persistent.entity. Okay, so now very first you have to annotate that class with the @entity annotation. Now let's add some more fields here. So let me add private int employee ID, private string name of the employee, then private float salary of the employee, and private string mail of the employee. Okay, so these are 4 fields I have added. Then let's create the getter and setter for that. So generate the getter setter for all the fields, and let me generate the toString method as well. Okay, so now we have created one entity class. Okay, now what we have to write here, so see, in this employee we have ID, name, salary and mail. Okay, this is the entity class. Now in MySQL database we have to create the table. Okay, and in that table we will be having all these fields. Okay, so now there one column will be ID, then name, salary and mail. Okay, now Hibernate will be like, Hibernate is the mediator between our Java application and the relational database or the MySQL. Okay, so now if you are writing here ID, whatever will be the column corresponding to that ID will be connected. Okay, so this ID and the column which is there in our database will be connected. Then this name and the name which is there in our database should be connected. Okay, so for that, very first here if we open this hibernate.cfg.xml file, which schema I have written here, HibernateDB. Okay, so let's go to our MySQL workbench and see, this is the schema. Okay, so in this schema we don't have any table here. Okay, and we don't want to create the table by ourselves. So let's go to our STS, and in this employee class, to create the table automatically by the Hibernate, what we have to write here, we have to write the annotation @table. Okay, now when you will write this annotation @table, it will create one table inside your HibernateDB schema, and the name will be the same as your class name. Okay, only this E will be in the small whenever we will whenever the Hibernate will create the table. Okay, now if we come here, this is the ID. Okay, so here we have to write the annotation @ID. So this ID will be the primary key. So to create the primary key, we will be writing @ID annotation. Okay, now this name is the column. Okay, column for the table. So for that we have to use the annotation @column. Then for the salary also we have to write @column, and for the mail also we have to write @column. Okay, now we have created our entity. So to create the entity, very first you have to annotate that class with @entity annotation. Then to create the table automatically by the Hibernate, we will write @table annotation. And to create the primary key, we will write @ID. Okay, so whenever you will create the entity, the must things are this @entity annotation and @ID annotation. In each entity there should be a primary key. Okay, now let's save this, and now let's come to our app.java file and run this application. And when we run this application, it should create this employee table inside our HibernateDB. Okay, so now it is not creating any table. So let me see why it is not creating. So here, okay, so here we have to add one more thing. You can do dot and then add annotated class, and here we have to add our class which is annotated with @entity annotation. Okay, so here we will write employee class. Now save this and rerun the project. Now our employee table should be created. So see here, first it is dropping the table if already exists, and then it is creating this table employee where id will be the integer, then male, name, salary, and the primary key is id. As we have written there @id, then it will consider it as a primary key. Okay, and why it is dropping this table? Because in this hibernate.cfg file we have written there hibernate.hbm to ddl.atto as a create. Create means what? Every time whenever you will execute your program, it will drop the table if already exists. Okay, and then it will create a new table again. Okay, so instead of create, if you write here update, then it will not drop the table. In the existing table only all the operations will be done. Okay, so now our employee table is created. So let's go to our MySQL workbench and just refresh this. So in this tables we got this employee table. Okay, so currently we don't have any data here. Okay, and see the table name is employee and all the field names are same as we have mentioned in our entity. Okay, so now let's minimize this, and if we go here in the employee, so here currently whatever is your this one, the class name is the table name. Okay, so now if you want to change the table name, then how you can give? In this @table annotation only you have to write name is equal to, and here you can give the table name. Okay, so now let's give the table name as employees. Okay, now this is the id, right? Then this is the name. Okay, so the column name also you can change. So currently the column name is name. So now if you want to change it to some other, then what you can write here? Name, and here you can write emp_name. Okay, then for the salary also you can do the same thing. You can provide the name, and here you can write emp_salary. And for the male also we can write name is equal to employee_male. Okay, so now what will happen? Now this employee table which is already created in our Hibernate DB schema will be dropped, and new table will be created with name employees, and the column names will be id, emp name, emp salary, and emp male. Okay, so save this and rerun and see the statements here. So now this employees table if already is there, then they will drop. Okay, so already employees table was not there. Now they have created this employees table, and see here the first column is id, second column is emp name. Okay, so if you see here, this is the emp name which we have given here. Okay, if we don't provide any name, then by default it will consider whatever the field name is there. Okay, so now here we have given the name explicitly, so it will give that name. So here we got emp name, emp male, emp name, and emp salary. Okay, and the primary key is id. Okay, so now you can go to the workbench, and again if you just refresh this schema, you will see the newly created table employees. Okay, and in this employees we have ID, employee mail, name and salary. Okay, so this way we can create the entity. Okay, so now let's go to our app.java file, and here let's try to create the object, this employee object, and let's try to insert some data into our employees table. Okay, so for that what we can write, to save the data or into the database, in this session we have one method session.save. Okay, so if you see this, we have this save method where we can pass the object which we want to save. Okay, so this way we can write, and here we will create the employee object and we will pass that object. Okay, so now first let's create the employee object. So employee is equal to new employee, and the same employee object we will pass here which we want to save in the database. Okay, so first let's set some values to this employee object. So employee dot set ID, and let me give the ID as a 1. Then employee dot set name, so let's give the name as Priya. Then employee dot set mail, so mail will be priya@gmail.com, and here employee dot set salary we have to set. Okay, so salary, let's give it as 24,000, and now this object of this employee will be saved here. Okay, in our employees table, in this table that value should be inserted. Okay, so let's go there, save this. Okay, and rerun the application. So see here, so here only this employees table is created, but we don't see any insert query. And also if we go to our workbench and execute this query, we are not getting any result in this employees table. Okay, so let's go here, and why this is not created or inserted the entry in our employees table, because here we are performing this save operation. Okay, so whenever we will write session.save, okay, that time this statement should be inside the transaction. Okay, so for that, how we will create the transaction? So for that you have to write session.get transaction. Okay, and if you assign the variable here, it will return us a transaction. Okay, now simply we just have to begin the transaction, and after this save operation we can just write transaction dot commit. Okay, and now if we save and execute this program, then this insert should be happen inside our employees table. So see here, very first they have created this employees table, and after that they have inserted the record in the employees. So see the query, insert into employees table, then this employee mail will be the mail whatever we have set here. Okay, so see here we have set priya@gmail.com, so that email will be inserted into our employees table. Then name, salary and ID. Okay, so let's go to workbench and hit this query, and see here we are getting the record 1, then mail as a priya@gmail.com, and employee name as a Priya, and the salary 24,000. This is the same data which we have inserted here. Okay, so now let's go to our hibernate.cfg.xml file and let me write here update so that our data should not erase. Okay, now in this app.java file we have saved one record. Now let's save one more record. So here we will give the id as a 2, then name as a Tina, Gmail as a tina@gmail.com, and give the salary as a 75,000. Okay, now save and rerun the application. See here, now that create table query will not hit because in our hibernate.cfg.xml file we have made this HBM to DDL auto as a update. So whenever we are writing update, it will not drop the existing, or it will not like first when we will write it create, it will check whether the table is already created or not. Okay, so if the table is already present, that will drop the table and create the new table. But when we are writing the update, it will not drop the existing table, but it will perform all the operations onto the existing table only. Okay, it will not create the new table every time. Okay, so now only the insert query is hit. Okay, so if we go here and check, one more record should be there with name Tina. Okay, so now we have inserted 2 records in our employees table. Okay, so here we have done with the save operation. Now let's see how to get the records from the database. Okay, so very first here we have used this save method to save the data. Okay, now we have other options also to insert these details into the database. Okay, instead of save we can use the persist method as well. Okay, this persist method also do the same task. So if you change this data here and let's give it as Meena, here also we'll write Meena, and salary let's get it as 98,000. And if we save and execute the program, then this Meena entry will be inserted in the table. So see here this insert statement. Okay, so if we go in the workbench and execute the query, you can see one more record is added. Okay, so to save the entry or to insert the record in the database, you can use save or persist method. Okay, now there is some difference between save and persist. So in next session we will see in detail what is the difference between save and persist. Okay, in today's video let's concentrate to complete the CRUD operations. Okay, so now we have done with one operation which is save. Now let's see how to get the data. Okay, so for that let me comment this line which is return to save the data. Now we want to get the data from the database. Okay, so in the database we have 3 entries, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so now let's suppose I want to fetch the data for the ID 2. Means I want to fetch this Tina, fetch the details of this Tina. Okay, so how I can do? Let's go here, and here what we have to use session.get method. Okay, now in this get, whenever we will fetch the data, very first we will provide which type of data you are fetching. So here we are fetching the employee details, so let's write it as a employee.class. And in the second parameter we have to provide the ID. So here we want to fetch the data whose ID is 2. So let's write it here 2. Okay, now if you assign the variable here, you will get the employee data. Okay, so let's write it as a emp, and even you can print the data here. So sysout emp. Okay, now if we save and execute the program, you can see here we will get the details of the employee whose ID is 2. So see here what query is there. Hibernate, select employee ID, male, name and salary from employees where employee ID is equal to, so here instead of question mark, our ID which we have provided there will be replaced, and then we will get the data whose employee ID is 2. Okay, so see here we are getting the data for the Tina, right? So this way we can get the data from the database. So for the get also we have another method which is load. Okay, and for the load, if now let's suppose instead of 2 you want to fetch the data of the ID 1. So now if you save and execute, you will get the records for the ID 1. So see here. Okay, so again we have the difference between this load and get. Okay, so we will see that in the next video. So we have done with the 2 operations, save and get. Okay, now let me comment this get as well. Now let's see how to update the details. Okay, if we go to our workbench and hit this query, so currently we have ID 1 for Priya. Okay, so now let's change the data of this Priya. We will change the employee name and the employee salary. Okay, so very first, to change the data of employee Priya, we need to fetch the data. Okay, so for that, how we can write the same thing here we did already. So here we will write session.get, and here we will provide what type of data you are getting, then the ID. So here I want to get the employee whose ID is 1. Okay, so 1 is the ID for Priya. Okay, so now let's go to the STS, and here we got that employee. Now what we have to do, emp.set so name, and here instead of Priya, I will set the name as let's suppose updated name. Okay, and then emp.set salary, we will update the salary as well, and salary, let's keep it as 72,000. Okay, and once we update the details here, what we have to write now, session dot update, and here we have to pass this employee object. Okay, now if you save this and run this application, the update query will hit. So see here, if we can just scroll, see here, first it will fetch the data for employee ID 1. After that, whenever we are writing update, it will hit this query, update the employees and set the male name and salary. Okay, where ID is equal to whatever ID we have sent. Now if we go to the workbench and hit this query again, so see here, for this Priya, the mail is priya@gmail.com. We have not updated the mail, we have updated the name. So previously the name was Priya, now the name is updated name, and the salary is also updated to 72,000. Okay, so this way we can update the data. Okay, so to update the data, we have to use this session.update method, and in this update we will pass the object of that employee which we want to update. Okay, now let's comment this thing. So now we are done with the save, then to fetch the data and to update the data. Okay, so 3 operations we have performed. Now the last one is to delete the object. Okay, so to delete the object also, very first we need to get the data. Okay, so let's suppose here we are writing session.get the employee whose id is 1 and we want to delete this employee. Okay, so for that we have to write session dot delete and here we will pass this employee object. Okay, so this way we can delete the employee. Save this and rerun the application. So see here, this object is deleted. So if we go to the workbench and hit this query, so our employee whose id is 1 is deleted. Now we have only 2 employees. Okay, so this way we can perform the delete operations. Okay, so we have performed all the CRUD operations using the Hibernate. Okay, so now one more thing we can just discuss here, which is this one. So when we have created this employee entity, to create the primary key we have used @id. Okay, and in this app.java file here I am setting my id. Okay, so actually whenever we are creating the primary key, that time it should generate automatically. Okay, so for that in this employee.java what you have to write, one more annotation you can use, @generated value. So this annotation, and here you can use the strategy as a identity. We have different options here: auto, identity, sequence, then the table. Okay, so for now let's use it as a identity. Okay, so now whenever we are using generated value annotation, okay, with this strategy identity, then we are giving the responsibility to generate this id to the database. Okay, we will not generate the id, or we will not create this id now by ourselves. Okay, so let's see the example. Okay, so here let me just comment this thing. Okay, now let's comment this id thing also, or we can remove it. Okay, and we have created this employee object, and now let's add the data for some another user. Let's say the Ram as an employee, and here also we will write ram@gmail.com and give the salary as 89,000. Okay, and then we will write here inside our transaction as session dot save, and here we will give the employee. Save this, and before execution let's check what is the data available. So see here we have id 2 and 3 for Tina and Meena. Okay, so now we have created one more employee with name Ram, and here we have not set our id. Okay, so as in this employee entity we have written @generated_value, and here we have provided the strategy as an identity. So database should take care of id generation. So save this and rerun the project. Okay, so if we what error we are getting, id doesn't have a default value. Okay, so very first actually we already have some data available in our employee employee table. So first go to this hibernate.cfg, and instead of update let's make it create, and then rerun this project. and see here now. So again this employees table is created and one insert statement is done. And if we go to the workbench and execute this statement, see here the ID 1 is generated automatically for the RAM employee. Okay, so this way we can give the ID generation task to the database. So this way we have covered how to create the entity, how to create this table automatically, okay, by using this @table annotation. Then how or what is the use of this @column, @id, then generated value. Okay, so these are some very basic annotations which we use every day. And then also we have seen how to create the session, then SessionFactory. Okay, what is this configuration class, and how to perform this CRUD operations. Okay, one more thing is that here we have given this hibernate.cfg.xml file. Okay, but if we have the file name as a hibernate.cfg.xml file, we don't have to give this file name as well here. Okay, so by default it will search for this hibernate.cfg.xml file only. But if you have given any other name, then you can mention that name here, okay, in this configure. Okay, now if I save this and let's change the data to, let's write here the name as Tom, then tom@gmail.com, and the salary will be 25,000. Okay, and now if we execute it, so see here we will not get any error. Even if we have removed the configuration file name, it will create the table and insert the data. Okay, but if you change this hibernate.cfg.xml file name, so let's go to the refactor and rename. So here instead of hibernate.cfg.xml, we will write hibernate1.cfg.xml. okay, and now if we save, and if we don't provide that name here in this configure method and try to run this application, see what will happen. So here we are getting the error that configuration exception could not locate cfg.xml resource, and it is checking for this one, the hibernate.cfg.xml. okay, but now if you write here this one, the hibernate1.cfg.xml, and run this project, we will not get any exception. Okay, so if your configuration file name is different than hibernate.cfg.xml, then you have to provide this file name explicitly. But if you are following the naming convention, then you don't have to provide the file name here. Okay, so that's it for today's video. We have covered pretty much all CRUD operations and how to create the entity. Okay, in next video we will see the difference between save and persist, then difference between the load and get, and we will explore that operations in detail. Okay, so thank you.